I don't think I've ever had an opinion change on a piece of media as drastically as it has with Dragon Age 2. Believe it or not, this was also my introduction to Dragon Age. Yeah, that's right, my first game in the series is one that some people would call the weakest entry. I remember back in 2011 when this game first came out, I played through it and I thought it was pretty good. I had a fun time playing it, really enjoyed the story and the combat, and I wanted to see what other people thought about it. That was my first mistake. This game was polarizing on release. You had some people who liked it, but the most vocal responses I've seen were people who were talking about how Origins was so much better. Now, I haven't played Origins yet, so I had no idea what they were on about, but eventually I got my hands on a copy of Origins and played through it, and it clicked. In that moment, my opinion on Dragon Age 2 did a complete 180, and looking back on that, it might have been a bit harsh. Sure, now I understood why some people didn't like it, but was it really as bad as I thought? I did replay it a few times after, but my opinion hasn't changed that much. That was about 14 years ago. Fucking hell. That was 14 years ago, and I like to believe that I mellowed out since then, and now I look at things in a more nuanced way, hopefully. So what better time than now to look back on Dragon Age 2 and see if I was right and that this game sucks, or if there's something more to it. Dragon Age 2 follows the story of a character named Hawke, a Ferelden refugee who is fleeing their village of Lothering with their mother and siblings to escape the Blight as they make their way to the city-state of Kirkwall. A fictional Kirkwall as opposed to the actual one in Scotland, which I learned about after the fact. When I found out about that, I had a moment of like, whoa, hold on, wait, this place is actually real? Because it sounds like some made-up name from Arthurian legends like Camelot or Avalon or South Wales. The story is told to us by Varric Tethras, a party member and close friend to Hawke, who we see in the opening cutscene being interrogated by Cassandra Pentagast, a member of the Seekers of Truth, which is an offshoot of the Chantry's Templars. Cassandra is looking for the champion of Kirkwall and to find out how they sparked a war between the mages and the Templars, and wants Varric to tell her everything about Hawke and their time in Kirkwall. We learn very quickly that Varric is an unreliable narrator, where the first story he tells is how Hawke and one of their siblings, either Bethany or Carver depending on which class you picked, fought off a horde of Darkspawn all on their own with ease. The story is told to us in 4 parts, a prologue and 3 main acts. The prologue shows Hawke fleeing their village with their family. Hawke's mother, Leandra Amel, suggests that they make their way to Kirkwall as her side of the family is already located there and have an estate in the city. Along the way, they meet 2 other people fleeing the Blight, Aveline and her husband, who joins them. They then come upon the horde of Darkspawn that we saw in Varric's exaggerated opening, and after fighting them off, one of Hawke's siblings gets killed by an ogre, and this depends on which class you choose to play as. Bethany if you're a mage, Carver if you're a warrior or rogue. After defeating the ogre and fighting off more Darkspawn, Hawke and the others are saved by Flemeth, who helps them escape the Blight and takes them to a ship set for Kirkwall in exchange for a favor. Upon arriving in the city with the other Ferelden refugees, Hawke is greeted by their uncle Gamlen Amel, who we learn lost the family estate due to his gambling addiction, and without their status as one of the city's nobility, couldn't get Hawke into Kirkwall as easily, and instead tells them that they could enter if they did some work for a mercenary company or a smuggling group for a year. During this time, Hawke and their family are now living in Kirkwall's low town with their uncle. The main acts of the story tell different chapters of Hawke's life separated by a few years. Act 1 has Hawke and their sibling looking to join an expedition into the Deep Roads to make some money and try to regain their family status within the city. This act is by far the longest in the game, and we get to meet all of our companions who will be joining us through this like 30-some hour game, as well as plant the seeds for plot points that we'll see in later acts. We get to see a group of Kunari led by the Arashok who are looking for an artifact called the Tome of Koslun, but end up being shipwrecked and stranded in Kirkwall, unable to return until they find the tome. We're also shown the tension between the mages and Templars in Kirkwall, and we learn of how the mages are treated within the city, how they're discriminated against and mistreated by the Templars, as well as learn of the paranoia and prejudice held by the city's Knight Commander Meredith. Act 2 is about the hostilities between Kirkwall and the Kunari, which eventually boils over into a full-on conflict where the Kunari assault the city. There's also a serial killer that's targeting the women of Kirkwall, and Hawke gains the title of the Champion of Kirkwall at the end of Act 2. And Act 3 shows us the start of the Mage-Templar conflict, and Hawke has to choose which side to support. Despite the Mage-Templar conflict being arguably the most important part of the story, given how throughout the acts you get to see the conditions and factors that led to it, Act 3 is the shortest part of the game. The lead writer, David Gator, went on to mention that there were plot points in Act 3 that ended up being cut from the final release of the game, which would have added added more build up to the conflict. One thing that didn't make sense during the finale is fighting the mage's first enchanter Orsino if you decided to help the mages. Gator mentioned in a Twitter thread from his now locked account, "I had to write that dialogue where Orsino turns even if you sided with him because his boss battle had been cut and there was no time to fix the plot." A real WTF moment. One thing that should be brought up was that Dragon Age 2 was developed over the course of 16 months. And if that sounds like a short development time, that's because it is. Development began when they were working on Dragon Age Awakening, and given the strict deadline for the game's release, this led to a massive amount of crunch, and if you're aware of other studios that used an insane amount of crunch time, you'll know it didn't end all too well. The game's writing was not the only thing that suffered. Something that'll become very obvious is the amount of reused maps you'll explore during the game. Dragon Age 2 keeps you in the city of Kirkwall and the surrounding outskirts, so it makes sense to reuse maps. You'll explore the same caves, the same buildings, the same districts, but then you'll notice something. Why does the layout of this mansion, which one of my party members squats in, have the exact same layout as this completely different mansion on the opposite end of the district? Or why does this one cave in the outskirts look the exact same as some underground tunnels in the city? On one hand, you can argue that since everything is told by Varric, he could be saying things like, "A champion then went into a cave, it was very cave-like," and Cassandra might lack the imagination to think of a different cave. But I like to believe that Kirkwall's architects thought that they have hit the pinnacle of interior design, or that nature has just peaked with the caves and anything else would be nothing short of dog shit. That being said, the overworld maps such as Hightown or Lowtown or Darktown, Lords of Dogtown, do look amazing and each have their own distinct personality. One interesting aspect that I found is that the Chantry is located within Hightown only, and you rarely get to see Templars or Chantry sisters in places like Lowtown or Darktown preaching the chant of light to people, unless they're there for some kind of specific duty, which you would usually see during quests. The Chantry itself also looks really opulent with massive golden statues and a very ominous presence. Compared to the Chantry in Ferelden, it looks far more imposing and threatening here in Kirkwall. Combat saw some changes in this game, and whether that's a good or bad thing depends entirely on who you ask. I'm someone who really likes the game's combat, so I think this is a welcome change. One of the main complaints BioWare received about Origins was that the combat felt slow, especially if you're on console. The main issue came about from the game's basic attack. On PC, you'd click on an enemy and your character would start attacking from range, or they'd run up and start swinging if they had a melee weapon. That was fine. But on console, you'd press a button to start auto-attacking, and then you'd just wait. If you press it again, then you'd stop auto-attacking. The game's creative director, Mike Laidlaw, said in a PlayStation blog interview, "Where I think it fell down more so for consoles than for PC was the sense of immediacy. Dragon Age 2 combat was made to be faster, more responsive, and it also looks a lot flashier. Now when you auto-attack, you get a combo you loop through, and each part of that combo is triggered by pressing an attack button." This was also the case on PC, but people mentioned how awful this felt, and that was changed to be similar to Origins, where you just have to click on the enemy once. Now I like the changes to the combat in this. It still felt like Origins, but at a faster pace, and it had me feel more engaged. I've seen comments about this combat feeling more arcadey, but I've also seen some say that this is the best combat the series has had, and while I'm going to agree more with the latter, I think the combat is held back by the fights. You know what's not fun? Wave encounters. I can put up fighting with waves of enemies if I was on a quest and the dungeon was relatively small and linear. I'm fine with that. What I don't like is having constant random encounters as I go from one side of the town map to the other where bandits jump down from the rooftops. What made some fights in Origins fun was that they felt intentionally designed. They felt like fights you could see in a Dungeons & Dragons session where the dungeon master has planned some big encounter, picked out the right monsters to give the players a challenge, and the players had to think about the best way to respond with their spells and abilities. Whereas Dragon Age 2's encounters instead feel like the dungeon master is just throwing a bunch of level 1 bandits at the players, and when they manage to beat them, throws another bunch of level 1 bandits, and it stops being fun, it stops being exciting, and it's only there to tire you out. Talent trees and spells were also streamlined instead of having 4 rows each. You now have paths to follow for each ability or spell, and are made more obvious whether they're activated abilities or not. Activated abilities have a square border, passives have a circle border, and sustained abilities have a hexagonal border. You're also able to upgrade activated and sustained abilities with these smaller icons next to them. Each class also has 3 specializations, which you can grab at levels 7 and 14. I don't have much to say about these, but there is one I want to give a sort of mini rant about. Blood Mage is a possible specialization for a Mage Hawke, and I don't think that should be allowed. I know Blood Mage is very popular for people, but I feel the only person who should be allowed to use blood magic is the Warden, especially given how the whole Mage-Templar conflict storyline in Dragon Age 2 has people constantly paranoid about blood mages, and the champion of Kirkwall, who gets named the champion by the fucking Knight Commander herself, is a blood mage. It also doesn't really come up in dialogue, so it doesn't really help to add to the story. What I think is that they should have dropped this and brought back Arcane Warrior. Your party members don't have the same specializations available to them, instead having their own unique trees, and I love this. It makes them feel unique and shows where their strengths are. You also have an even distribution of classes among them, not counting your surviving sibling and a certain someone. You have 2 mages, 2 warriors, and 2 rogues, and each end up filling a unique role. For mages, you have Anders and Meryl. Meryl focuses more for damage, with her tree being a mix of blood magic and keeper magic, while Anders has more of a focus on being a healer. Your rogues are Isabella, who is more melee focused, and Varric, who is more ranged focused. As for warriors, you have Aveline as your tank, and Fenris, who uses a greatsword. One change that was made is that you're not able to customize your party members' equipment. The only thing you can change are their weapons and accessories. You're able to upgrade their armor and give them additional benefits such as increased critical chance or increased defense, and you can also enchant the armor they're wearing, but any armor you find in the world is for Hawke alone, which is a bit disappointing. One thing companions do get are 2 passives within their specialization trees that are unlocked based on whether you've built a friendship or rivalry with them. Like with Origins, throughout the game you'll be given dialogue choices, and based on what you pick, your companions will either respond positively or negatively. But unlike the previous game where there's no benefit to building a rivalry with your party members, you now get to unlock new passives. For example, if you built a friendship with Anders, he'll gain Eye to Eye, where he'll get a 10% increase to all of his magic damage. But if you built a rivalry with him, then he'll have no compromises, where he'll get increased health regen. Now I love this. It's a fun concept, but it's a shame that I can't really get into the roleplay for this game. I think the biggest change that bothered me going from Origins to Dragon Age 2 is the dialogue wheel. Dialogue in Origins are these sentences written out, unvoiced by your character, and this gives you a lot of options to roleplay your warden however you like. And this kind of blew me away back then. Keep in mind, I did say that I started with Dragon Age 2 as my first game, so going back and seeing the amount of dialogue options to pick from was kinda wild given how small of a thing that was. Meanwhile, in Dragon Age 2, you have a choice between 3 personality options. Diplomatic, where you get to be the hero everyone looks up to, you're far more likable, and people just have a good time around you. Aggressive, where it's the opposite, and you're far more agitated, like everything is fucked, everybody sucks. And lastly, humorous, where you tell jokes that no one really finds funny, and you're just trying to struggle through it all, sorta like my videos. And depending on which choices you pick more often, Hawke's personality will also shift to fit your choices. Hawke is fully voiced, and there'll be times where they'll speak unprompted, and when they do, the line will be based on the primary personality choices that you made. So most of the time playing this game, I picked one personality and stuck with it, which usually is the more humorous option because I just don't see Hawke being all that serious. But sometimes it might not always be the best option to pick given certain situations. So sometimes I will pick a diplomatic option or maybe the aggressive option because it'll fit the scene better. But what you'll come to find out is that the tone of each of these options is so drastically different that it feels so jarring. Playing through most of the game with one option, cracking jokes and giving one-liners, got me so used to Hawke's sarcasm that picking any other option just felt like I shifted to a whole different person. And because of this, I would default to picking the haha funny option, not just for the consistency and that purple Hawke is the best Hawke, but also because I find it difficult to roleplay out my choices. Hawke to me feels more like a preset character rather than a original character donut steal. Even if you can customize Hawke's appearance, pick their class, and control their choices, I can't see Hawke as my character. It might be because of the very limited dialogue options, or that they have an already pre-established background, or the fact that Hawke is just their family name and not a title like the Warden, but I see them more like Geralt from The Witcher, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It wasn't until I began to internalize the idea of Hawke being more of bioware's character that I really began to like Hawke as a character. But Hawke isn't the only character in the story. There's also their companions, 3 of whom have been in Origins, and I found myself feeling closer to these characters a lot more than the ones in Origins. And it's not like the ones in Origins aren't memorable in their own way. There's a moment in the game where you get to see Alistair again, and it depends on what happened to him in Origins. And I had him become King of Ferelden, so he's here on a visit, and he ends up saying that one line of his that got memed in the fandom.
That's right. Swooping is bad.
I don't even know what the joke is, but people loved this back then, and I think the only thing stopping this from being comedy gold is if he just spiked the lens while he said it. And the reason I feel closer to this group is because I found myself swapping between them a lot more often than I did with the last ones. I don't think I swapped too often in Origins. I mean, last playthrough I just straight up forgot to do Oghren and Sten's quests, but the companion quest lines in this game feel a lot more tied to the main story in one way or another. Anders' questline comes to mind as the first one when thinking of the Mage-Templar conflict, given how his showed the abuses the mages have suffered under the Templars, primarily shown as forcing the mages to become tranquil, and how this initiative was pushed forward by a Templar named Otto Ulrich. And while Anders would show us what the Templars are doing to the mages, both Meryl and Fenris' quest lines would try and shape our opinion of mages. Meryl was her keeper's successor, and she wants to restore an Illuvian, which is an elven artifact, which is the same one from the Dalish elf origins that ended up being blighted. When she asked for help or guidance from her keeper or clan, she received none and instead turned to using blood magic under the guidance of a demon. Now that sounds really bad, I know. You throw in the word demon and blood magic and suddenly all hell breaks loose. But as you have Meryl along with you, you're going to start to wonder if this is how blood mages usually are. But as you go through the game, you'll come across other blood mages and they're more inclined to harm others. And you'll notice a stark contrast between them and Meryl. The main difference to pick up here is that Meryl grew up among the Dalish while the others were in the Circle of Magi, and so you'd probably wonder if maybe, just maybe, the Circle is part of the problem. And if the mages had more freedom and less policing by the Templars, then maybe things would be better. But that's where Fenris' questline comes in. Fenris is an escaped slave of a Tevinter Magister, and you'll ultimately come face to face with his old owner. Tevinter is a nation where mages are the ones in positions of power, and they also have more freedom, and slavery, and racism. And you learn of the torture that Fenris has gone through, how he got these markings on his skin, and it makes you wonder what would happen to the rest of Thedas if people who can use magic gained more freedom. If the mages had more freedom, will they make a second Tevinter? Varric's questline is a continuation of the main story at the end of Act 1, where you would go on an expedition in the Deep Roads with Varric and his brother Bartrand, and Bartrand would abandon you and Varric in the Deep Roads as he leaves with a red lyrium idol. Years after the expedition, Bartrand comes back to Kirkwall, and when you see him, you'll notice he's gone a bit mad from the exposure to the idol. You learn that he eventually sold it, and over time you'll find out it was sold to Knight Commander Meredith. Meredith is already paranoid and prejudiced, and if the idol made Bartrand go mad, imagine how it will eventually affect Meredith. So this is the point where I talk about Isabella and Aveline's quest lines, but they aren't as close to the main story as the others. Isabella's does tie in with the Kunari, since the artifact that they're looking for, that kept them in the city, was stolen by Isabella, and that comes to a conclusion at the end of Act 2, where you could potentially lose a party member depending on your choices. And thinking back on Aveline's storyline, I would have guessed it would have been something along the lines of how corrupt the government positions in Kirkwall are, since her guard captain has had gambling debts and is doing a bad job at being a captain. But then he's removed really easily, and he ends up joining this anti-refugee militia and targets the Ferelden refugees in the city. But I think it's mostly just to show a part of Kirkwall that's like a shithole, in order to show how the Kunari were justified in their attack of the city, because they attacked thinking that like, wow, this city sucks, we're gonna fix this. Also, you can romance 4 of the party members, and I don't have much to say about the romances this time around. Well, I mean, I do, but I'm saving that for the Inquisition video because I want to try and tie it all together with something. So all I'm going to say now is I think Meryl is the best romance, and the greatest sin this video game has done was make me find the Welsh accent attractive.
Yeah. In Hightown, the rich, fancy part of the city with no rats in it. And you, with an elf.
Going back to Hawke and my opinion about them, I think another reason I didn't like him as much back then was that I kept them as the focal character all the way through. And that sounds weird to say because, yeah, of course they're the focal character. The opening cutscene with Cassandra and Varric put Hawke in that light, the champion of Kirkwall whose actions and decisions led to such events as the Kunari assault on the city or the Mage-Templar conflict. But as the game goes on, the narration shifts. You get to learn more and notice that these events didn't happen because of Hawke, or at least not because of Hawke alone, and instead these major events happened because of the social and political conditions that existed within Kirkwall. In a way, the focal point transitions from Hawke to the city, and the story of Dragon Age 2 is in fact about Kirkwall and its people, which I guess also includes Hawke because Hawke is one of Kirkwall's people, so in a way it's still a story about Hawke? Huh. But you'll come to realize that a lot of the choices and decisions you make have little to no impact on the main story. No matter how hard you try, no matter what choices you pick, main events like the Kunari assault on the city or the Mage-Templar conflict will happen. The scene that struck me the most was during Anders' questline, where you're talking to the Grand Cleric, and I've picked options to urge her to talk to both Meredith and Orsino to try and ease the situation, and her response was just waiting to see what the Maker has planned, and that was so fucking frustrating to hear. So you might wonder, what's even the point? Does anything matter? Oh no, nihilism. Damn, this shit sucks. And yeah, it does suck, because player impact on the story has been a big part of Origins, and if these main quest plotlines are going to happen regardless of what we do, then what impact do we even have on the story? But that's not really in the spirit of role-playing, is it? I understand why some of this would be upsetting to people who are coming from Origins. You don't get to see all the checkboxes being filled or all your choices coming together to alter a scene, and when it does, you're going to feel the weight of your decisions and that you played a major role in affecting the outcome. But when that's stripped away, you'll then notice something. You'd be given a peek behind the curtain, and you'll be shown the illusion of free choice. If you ever ran a tabletop RPG, then you know of times when you really want the players to do something. Maybe you had a big fight planned, maybe you wanted to have this big reveal of a major plot point, or maybe you planned the story to take place in a certain part of the world and the players are just not getting there. The thing you want to avoid is railroading, which is taking away their agency and instead are pushing them in that direction. So instead, you give them a few choices and you see which one they pick. But what they don't know is that regardless of what they pick, the outcome is the same. The difference is how good of an illusion it is. And ultimately, this is a video game. A video game that took 16 months to make, so there could only really be so much variation in the story. But it doesn't mean that your choices don't have any impact. The friendship and rivalry system is one way your choices have an impact. As you build either friendship or rivalry with your companions, they're going to respond differently to you. Granted, it's not the best executed system given how a few options aren't going to make sense. There's one time with Fenris where you can give him back to his old master and then you can change your mind at the last minute, and how he'd still follow you after that when in reality I'd feel like he'd just tell you to fuck off and then he'd leave the party. The point here is that a lot of the impact you have is a lot closer to Hawke with their character development, their family, their companions, as opposed to some major story plot points. And it might be liberating in a way to think that your choices don't matter as much, so you can pick what feels right for you or your Hawke instead of trying to get the best outcome possible when trying to roleplay a character that's like an asshole or something. And in a way, it makes it so that no choice is the right or wrong one, and instead you would have to choose based on the information you have and what seems like the best thing to do. And if something goes wrong, then it's not the end and it could be salvaged somehow. But there's one choice in the game that I'd say is the right choice, and it's when you get to the end of the game and you gotta pick a side in the main conflict, you choose the mages. Actually, let's talk about that. During the final mission, tensions reach a tipping point between the mages and the Templars. Meredith threatens to lock the mages in the tower in the gallows to investigate the circle for blood magic, and Orsino resists. As Hawke arrives on the scene to try and de-escalate tensions, both Meredith and Orsino look to Hawke to support their respective side. When things don't progress, Orsino suggests consulting the Grand Cleric. At this point, Anders steps forward and he tells Meredith that he will not let Meredith treat all mages like criminals, and tells Orsino that he is too passive towards the Templars, and said that something had to be done. And we're treated to a delightful cutscene where Anders blows up the fucking chantry. Meredith calls for the right of annulment to annul the Kirkwall circle, and Hawke has to choose a side. Do they help the mages defend against the Templars, or do they side with the Templars and put the mages down? Make your choice. Unless you're playing Hawke as someone who is staunchly pro-Templar, or if you're someone who believes that a cop can do no wrong, then there's no real reason to side with the Templars. Look, I get it. I know why people might pick them over the mages. There are mages who you'll help in the story, and then by Act 3 or so, they'll become overly antagonistic. You'll find mages who will turn into abominations. You'll see a large number of blood mages who are out to harm others, such as a moment where a group of mages use blood magic to force some Templars to become possessed by demons. There's even a major plot point in Act 2 where you're tracking down a serial killer who targets women, and you'll come to find out that they're a necromancer and one of their victims is Hawke's mom. I know, magic is dangerous, but if you start to think about the situation in Kirkwall for more than 5 minutes, then support for the Templars falls apart, and that's because of a power dynamic that has been introduced ever since Origins. The thing to keep in mind is that the Circle of Magi is not a magic school. Yes, mages learn to control magic and cast spells, but its structure makes it more like a prison. Mages get little to no privacy as they're constantly being watched by Templars, and if they want to leave the grounds of the Circle, then they need to have permission from the Templars. If a mage leaves the Circle without permission, then they would be labeled an apostate mage, at which point they would systematically be hunted down by the Templars with the use of a phylactery, and would either force the mage back into the Circle, potentially make them tranquil, or execute them on the spot depending on how lenient the Templars are. The Rite of Tranquility would also be performed under certain cases if the mage could not control their magic and risk demonic possession, or if the mage requests it themselves, and this is done with the agreements of the Templars' Knight Commander and the Circle's first enchanter. By chantry law, a mage who has undergone the harrowing is not allowed to be made tranquil unless the mage themselves requests it. It is not to be used as a punishment because it is a fucking lobotomy. In dire cases, if the Circle is deemed irredeemable by the Knight Commander, then they can request the Rite of Annulment from the Grand Cleric, which will, as the name suggests, annul the Circle, and every mage in that Circle gets genocided. Keep that part in mind though, especially now as we talk about Kirkwall's Circle. Now I don't know how Kirkwall's Circle was before Meredith became Knight Commander in the city, but what is known is that living conditions for mages have become progressively worse ever since she took the position. Mages would be made tranquil for petty reasons, such as a mage named Maddox who fell in love and started writing love letters, and had a Templar named Samson who was sympathetic towards him deliver these letters. Eventually, Samson was caught and he was expelled from the order, and Maddox was then made tranquil. In Act 2, it's mentioned by Anders that there is an increasing number of tranquil mages, some that even pass the harrowing. Investigating further will lead you to a Templar named Otto Ulrich, who I mentioned earlier. He has been forcibly making mages tranquil and even proposed this idea to Meredith, the Grand Cleric, and the Chantry's Divine, only to have it be rejected. Now you'd assume if Samson delivering love letters for a mage is enough to have him be removed from the order, breaking Chantry law would have the same effect for Ulrich. Yeah, no, turns out Ulrich was still a Templar, and he was still forcing mages to become tranquil without Meredith's knowledge. What makes it even worse is that he was using this as a way to facilitate his abuse of the mages.
You know what happens to mage girls who don't toe the line around here, don't you?
Please, no! Don't make me tranquil. I'll do anything.
That's right. Once you're tranquil, you'll do anything I ask.
Concerns about Ulrich were also brought up by another Templar to Meredith, but this was ignored, and that Templar was then reprimanded by Ulrich himself. Other abuses of power by the Templars include beating and whipping the mages if they so much as talked to civilians, as well as death squads who attacked people who sympathized with the mages. Despite the magic the mages have, the Templars have always been in a position of power, and hearing about the abuse and seeing the actions of the Templars is enough of a reason to side with the mages. But what about everything I mentioned on why people would side with the Templars? Apart from the serial killer points, which we will get to, everything the mages have done have been in response to the Templars. In one of the Varric and Cassandra cutscenes, Varric says this line:
Champion of Kirkwall. That was the reward. A fine title. Every noble at the keep owed the champion their lives. She wasn't just a hero. She was now the most important person in the city. Except for Knight Commander Meredith, of course. With the Viscount dead, she stepped in to keep order. Things quickly got out of hand. The more she squeezed the mages, the more they resisted. The more they resisted, the tighter she squeezed.
At some point, they saw no other way but to fight back, and I can't defend the mages who become abominations. It just ends up feeling like a last resort for most mages. With regards to the use of blood magic, you'd have to ask why the mages would turn to blood magic in the first place, and the stereotype of blood magic is that it is an evil form of magic when really it's just a taboo form of magic. I mentioned this before, but this is where Meryl's character comes into play. Meryl and her use of blood magic is meant to be seen in comparison and contrast to the other blood mages mages we see in the game. Meryl hasn't used her magic in malevolent ways like some of the other blood mages, and we have to ask what's different about Meryl, an elf who grew around the Dalish where magic hasn't been antagonized, or the blood mages who most likely grew up under the Chantry and have been demonized. Now Quentin, the necromancer who killed Hawke's mom. When I got to this part, it really felt like the game was trying to give me a reason to agree with the Templars, but I just couldn't. The problem here is that I'm well adjusted enough to recognize that what happened here is the action of one mage and not mages as a whole. You could argue that this is an example of how harmful magic could be given his use of necromancy, which I believe is also taboo in most of Thedas, similar to blood magic, but I guess this is also an argument of where you draw the line. The most damning thing about this is a note you'll find as you explore the place, which is signed with just the letter O. You'll later learn this is from First Enchanter Orsino, and he has been protecting Quentin from the Templars so he could use his knowledge of magic later. This has led people to believe that Orsino knew that Quentin was a serial killer and has been doing fucked up things the entire time, but confronting him, Orsino mentions that he knew that Quentin was a bit weird, but not serial killer weird. On top of my point of it only being one mage, being a mage is not a prerequisite to being a serial killer in Thedas. Act 1 literally had a quest about a killer who targeted elven children, and that guy wasn't even a mage. My final argument is when Meredith calls for the rites of annulment. Anders is not a circle mage. He was acting independently when he planned to blow up the Chantry. None of the mages in the circle had anything to do with it, and Meredith still deemed it necessary to kill every single mage in Kirkwall. The argument to make here is that proper justice would be to put Anders on trial alone, but this ends up not being enough to convince Meredith. She is too far gone. So whether you choose to execute Anders here doesn't affect the outcome for the rest of the quest. Any choice to side with the Templars at this point is to damn an entire group of people for the actions of one person, which is pretty fucking evil. David Gator mentioned that if they had more time, then there would be a third option to side with neither of them, and while I can see that being a popular choice, I believe that's just the same as siding with the Templars because of the power dynamic. What I think could be better is if you could have people side against Meredith and or Orsino specifically. During the game, you could talk to a few Templars who do not agree with Meredith, who are more sympathetic to the mages, and if you complete those quests, imagine having them on your side and convincing some of the other Templars that Meredith was wrong, also showing that Orsino might not be fit to lead the mages given how complicit he's been the entire time in leading people down a path of blood magic, which through most of Thedas, mages don't really want to use, and most of them don't want to become abominations. So you could have optional quests that could be completed to convince Templars who are doubting whether Meredith's orders are the right thing to do, and when you reach the point to pick a side, you can convince the Templars to break away from Meredith. I was trying to think of a way to turn against Orsino specifically, and not the mages, but the more I think about it, the more obvious it seems that Meredith here is the main problem. Granted, Orsino has done some fucked up things, and you could side against Orsino and Meredith at the same time in this hypothetical idea that I have, but Orsino alone probably wouldn't change much with what the game already has. Anyway, ACAB includes Templars, even Alistair. The more I think about Dragon Age 2, the more I think that this game deserved better. Did you know this wasn't even the first idea for a sequel? The original sequel was going to be Inquisition, and I doubt the Inquisition we have today was the same one they had in mind back then. Whatever they had to be put on hold. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about now is in the book Blood, Sweat, and Pixels by Jason Schreier, and it has a chapter on Dragon Age 2, and it gives some insight into the game's development. Problems started when BioWare Austin kept missing their deadlines for Star Wars: The Old Republic. This caused a gap in revenue for EA, which they needed BioWare to fix. Mark Dara, the game's director, said that Dragon Age 2's inception was to fill this gap, and was originally going to be called Dragon Age Exodus. EA's marketing executives told them to change the name to Dragon Age 2, and BioWare agreed to have the game released in 16 months. Just for comparison, Origins took 7 years to make. Given the time constraint, a lot of things had to be cut. Larger areas similar to Orzammar, Redcliffe, the Brazilian forests, those were removed. Player origin stories also had to be removed. Player impact and reactivity to the player was also taken out, as none of these were possible to do within a 16-month time frame. I did mention earlier in this video the amount of reused maps, but this decision, as well as a decision to have the game be set within Kirkwall, shaved months of development time for this project. Reading this chapter, I can't help but feel that this game was doomed from the start. It wasn't possible for them to create a game as large or as ambitious as Origins, and all of this has really changed my perspective on this game. A lot of fans have also started warming up to Dragon Age 2, Yeah, the game is flawed, it struggled and suffered, but when the game does something right, it really shines. This game didn't sell as well as Origins, but according to Mark Dara, as quoted in the book, in certain dark accounting corners of EA, it's considered a wild success. There was an expansion planned for this game called Exalted March, but that got cancelled in summer of 2011 so they can work on a new game. This game did get some DLC. It got some minor DLC like the Black Emporium and various player items, but it also received 3 major DLC releases. Exiled Prince gives us a new companion with his own storyline, Sebastian Vale, the titular exiled prince of Starkhaven. Yeah, don't think I forgot about him, though I wish I could. Sebastian is a rogue archer, and I saw someone describe him as having major youth passer energy, and I just can't see him in any other way. Sebastian's main quest is about his search for his family's murderers. You meet him in Act 1 where he places a bounty, and then he just fucks off for 3 years to try and petition the Viscount of Kirkwall to help him reclaim Starkhaven. He doesn't properly join you until Act 2, where you find out that the person who killed his family was a woman named Lady Harriman, who got corrupted by Desire Demon to be obsessed with her desires. Wild how it works out like that. She assassinated Sebastian's family to further her power by placing a puppet on Starkhaven's throne, or something. I didn't pay much attention to his story. It's not that bad, but I don't really care for Sebastian. I just got really upset when he tried really hard to convert Fenris to the Andrastian faith over and over again, and I just wanted him to chill and leave him alone. The more I look at Sebastian standing there on the character select screen, the more I wonder, who invited this guy here? He does have his fans, I know, so if you're a fan of Sebastian, let me know because I read every comment. I want to find out why. But I can safely say that I'm not a fan of Sebastian. It's also funny how he's included in the game, because at the end when Anders blows up the Chantry, the game cuts to him yelling and collapsing to the ground, but it feels so awkward because you don't get to see any of the other party members about, so I can only assume they're watching him having a breakdown in public, and they're just standing there like, yeah, I don't want to talk to him.
Elfina, no! Make her no! She was your most faithful, your most beloved. Why didn't she listen to me?
Did you know that Sebastian is probably the only straight party member you have in the game? And he is a potential romance for Hawke, but he has a decent number of requirements to be met before you can enter a proper romance with him. First, you have to be playing as female Hawke. Second, you have to not be in an active romance with another party member and make her help you if you slept with them. You're not able to romance him if you did. You can't unfuck yourself from this. You also have to either have 100% friendship or 100% rivalry with him. And most important of all, you have to kill Anders. So not only is this guy, this altar boy, asking you to kill your healer, but even if you did, he won't even sleep with you. That's right, Sebastian is a celibate boy, but you're not missing out because I would guess he's more of a lights-on missionary only kind of guy. It's like a 2-layered joke. It's also really funny if you don't kill Anders, because he'll threaten you if you don't, and if you stand your ground, he'll back away and say something like, I won't fight you today, Hawke, but someday. And then he just leaves the party and you don't have him for the final fight, and I guess he just goes to Starkhaven or something. Mark of the Assassin I would describe as sort of a one-off D&D style adventure. It's not too serious, it's a bit of fun, and it has Felicia Day. This one has you meet an elf named Talus who is looking to steal something from an Orlesian estate. During the story, we learn that Talus is actually a Kunari agent, and she's tracking down a Talvashoth named Salith who has information on other Kunari spies like Talus, and he plans to sell that information and make it public, which would cause problems for the Kunari like Talus. Mark of the Assassin isn't particularly long, and it feels like a more light-hearted adventure compared to the main story, and it has what I think one of the better Purple Hawke lines.
I've been stung by a bee. I think it's swelling. Maker, am I dying? The swelling is almost as big as your head. Don't just stand there, man. Do something before it's too late. If I die, make sure the world knows. I died at Chateau Hain!
There's no need for such drama. Come with me.
It's an alright DLC, you can kiss Felicia Day, I didn't because I'm loyal to Meryl, and that's about it really. While this was the final story DLC released for Dragon Age 2, there is one more that is probably a lot more important than this. If you're going to play through any of Dragon Age 2's DLC, it has to be Legacy. Legacy has you explore an old Grey Warden prison, lured there by a group of Carta dwarves who are trying to get their hands on your blood. As you travel further into the prison, you'll learn that the past Grey Wardens have trapped a powerful darkspawn and sealed him away, initially wanting to use him to end the Blight. You get to learn that this darkspawn is sealed away with the blood of Hawke's father, who is also a mage, and now a group of Grey Wardens want to break the seal, and that can only be done with the blood of a Hawke like yourself. The DLC is a fun dungeon crawl, giving some more lore on the Grey Wardens and Hawke's father, which I liked given that he died before the events of Dragon Age 2, so you don't get to hear as much about him apart from codex entries, and you get to fight a darkspawn named Corypheus. This ends up being important for Dragon Age Inquisition, so if you're going to be playing any of these DLCs, it would probably be this one just to get the introduction to Corypheus. I didn't think I'd come to a point where I think Dragon Age 2 is a good game again, but here we are. And it's strange because this game hasn't changed that much since its launch. It still has all of its flaws and all of its issues, but when I acknowledged its negatives, I decided I wanted to look for some positives, and what I got out of that was possibly the best story this series has ever told. As a person who likes fantasy stories, I'm all for some save the world plot like with Origins. Dragon Age 2 is not that. It's not about saving the world, it's about trying to live your life and doing what you can to stop things from catching on fire, and this story has felt much more grounded, and I love that. There's been no major heroics here. The most we got was stopping the Kunari assault and being called champion. A lot of this has come about from a big change in perspective, and that's something I learned while working on this video, where you can acknowledge the negatives but also look for the positives. It's really easy to have your opinion be shaped by a bias to be more negative or more positive, and that was something I've been guilty of before, thinking that the combat was the only good thing in the game, but that made me shrug off everything else the game had tried to do, and I don't think that's really fair. And this change in perspective also made me look at this game as its own thing and not have it be compared to Dragon Age Origins. But I swear, if I see even one comment say something along the lines of Dragon Age 2 is a good game, but it's not a good Dragon Age game, I'm gonna fucking... Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you played Dragon Age 2, then let me know who you sided with, whether it's the Mages or the Templars, and if you helped the Templars, then let me know why. Tell me more, maybe I missed something when explaining in the video. As always, if you liked the video, then leave a like. If you didn't, then leave a dislike. I got Inquisition as the next video that I'm working on, so if you want to see that video, then consider subscribing to the channel. I don't normally advertise my socials on here, but if you want to find me, you can find me on Blue Sky, there's a link in the description, and maybe if you want, you can follow me on Twitch, where I stream like once in a blue moon, just so you know where I am in case I disappear for like a month or so. Anyway, that's all from me for now. I'll catch you all next time. Thank you so much again for watching the video, and remember that I appreciate you.